Hello creators, how are you guys? It's great to hang out with you again for another Video Creators Podcast episode. We got new stuff for you guys coming every Tuesday to SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, lots of places where we hang out and talk about stuff just to help you guys grow your YouTube audience so you can spread a message that reaches people and changes their lives. One of the things that is becoming more and more important for creators as they're growing and getting bigger is this idea of like, do I need to trademark my intellectual property and my branding and my channel? Am I in risk of someone else stealing it and using it? And so we want to talk with you guys today about trademarks, word marks, benefits of doing this, drawbacks to doing it, whether or not you should do this or not, and how do you make that type of decision and moving forward. So with us here today, I have the lawyer that I use, Mr. Kenneth Kunkel of Kunkel Law. Good to have you, man. How are you?
Doing well.
So Kenneth and I first met, oh boy, I'm putting myself on the spot here. It was like 2009, maybe?
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was I had uploaded a video to YouTube. I think it was like 2009-ish. And it went up, and someone who is also in that video didn't want a minor of theirs, their son, in the video. And so I took it down, even though I thought it was a great clip. I had permission from the dad, but not from the mom. And actually, the dad's the one who gave me this clip. I put it up there, and it started getting a lot of traction. You know, in those days, like 3,000, 5,000 views within a few hours is good traction. I took it down, though, when these people found out. And I thought it was over. Okay, no big deal. They don't want it up. Not a big deal. I'll take it down. A month later, someone else re-uploads this to YouTube, and it goes crazy viral. And by that, I mean, like, by the end of the day, it's showing up on Insider Edition, Perez Hilton, Hollywood Insider. Like, it is going crazy big, and someone else is getting all the attention and revenue from it. And so that's when the person, when they saw this, who wanted it down, went like, they were livid, and rightly so. So that's when I reached out, like, what do I do? I called Kenneth. I did like a Google Maps thing, like search, and found him as a copyright trademark lawyer, and that's how I got to know Kenneth by trying to unviralize that video, which is like the opposite of what most people want these days.
Exactly.
So, and ever since then, I've been working with you. It's been fun. I appreciate all the contract reviews you've helped me navigate. And the thing I like about him, and I'll let him talk here in a second, but the thing I like about him is, Kenneth, I feel like you have like a heart of a teacher. It's like when you go through these contract reviews with me, whether it's a brand deal or a negotiation I'm working on with something, or, you know, contract work with someone. You're like, you know, you make it very easy for me to understand what's in this and what these things mean in like normal, common, everyday English, as well as here's the thing that's not in this contract that you need to, you know, consider. And then I also love it that you go to bat for me, and I don't have to look like the bad guy when we do this. So
at the end of the day, you got to understand what you're signing. So I can tell you it's good, but if you don't understand it, you can't live up to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you guys want to check him out, I'll put a link in the show notes. If you're listening to the audio version of this, or if you're watching the video version on YouTube, down in the description below, you can find links to his website and things, and check him out if you guys would like to. Let's talk about this trademark thing, which is kind of your area of expertise. Is that right?
Yeah, it's definitely a growing part of my practice. It's something I do quite a bit of. It's probably half my practice or more.
Yeah, and I remember I've worked with you looking into whether or not I should trademark a business I had before, Video Creators, and then this one now too. And I'd like me to talk a little bit about that here in a second. But just for people who don't know what trademarks are, what is that? Like, if we're just kind of introduced to this.
Well, you know, people sometimes think about all the different kinds of intellectual property. We talk about intellectual property. Obviously, those are things that are usually intangible. And they're things from your brain, and, you know, intellectual, if you will. You got things like patents, and those are things like inventions. You got things like copyright, that's music, or the script for a show, or what it might be. That creative content. But trademarks are a little bit different. Trademarks are, they identify where something's coming from. Mm-hmm. And I always, kind of a base starting point for people to think about it is, they're a consumer protection. It's so that if I'm looking at a video or if I'm looking to go buy a candy bar or whatever it might be, I know that when I see such and such brand, I'm going to get what I think I'm expecting to get, and I'm not going to get something else. And so it's about protecting brands for both the consumer and also that when people put a lot of time and effort into building something, they get the benefit of it at the same time. So it kind of has two purposes.
Yeah. So for a YouTube creator, what are some of the benefits that they should be thinking of when it comes to trademarking or not trademarking, their brand? For my case, video creators, or even Tim Schmoyer, and we can get into some of those examples. But just first of all, what are the benefits of what we should be considering with this?
Yeah, from a video perspective, you got a couple different reasons. Obviously, you want to, if you're going to be putting all that effort into building the brand online, you want to be able to protect it. And, if you have a trademark, whether it's what they call a common law trademark just because you use it, or whether it's because you've registered a trademark with the federal government, whichever one it might be, if you have built that and received trademark recognition, you can take that to YouTube and say, listen, this guy over here, he's trying to take advantage of all the hard work I've done, and by using my name, and you can then go in and say, cut it out. Right. Also, at the same time, many folks are now expanding into other areas like merchandise and T-shirts, hats, whatever it might be, and. I was going to say, I see. Is there a brand on that?
There is, but I intentionally wear hats that is very small just because I don't want to get in any issues eventually.
So the brands themselves, if you're a video creator, obviously you might have merchandising interests, whether it's cookware or whatever it might be. And by obtaining trademark rights in whatever form, you can then prevent others, again, from making similar products and, again, trading on your name and confusing people that might be following you at that point. So
in my situation, it could be someone who decides that they are going, like, let's take my family's channel, for example, Smoothies. And people, let's say it grows, we're popular, and people are like, we want to bank on the success that channel has had, so we are going to make a Smoothies channel as well. Give it the same name, same title, right. Maybe use like their same images and things like that, and make another channel. That happens on Instagram like a lot, actually. I didn't even think about that. Where we have people making fan accounts, and sometimes they call it like Smoothies Official. And I just reach out and be like, hey, can you just make it clear this is not official? And usually they're like, oh, sorry. And they're just like, oh, I can't believe he messaged me, but, and that takes care of it. But, so trademarking something like Schmovies would give me a legal recourse to be able to go back and say, like, you got to shut this channel down.
Yeah, you're going to have some degree of protection right away, because one of the ways you acquire, there's a couple different ways you can acquire trademark rights. One way is in legalese, it's a common law trademark, meaning you just start, taking it off of YouTube for a moment. Say you open a restaurant, you open your restaurant and you call it, Schmoolies, okay? And you're selling hamburgers, cheeseburgers, and somebody else down the street decides to open up the same restaurant with the same name. Well, okay, obviously consumers are going to get confused at that point. You have common law trademark rights at that point. However, in those contexts, it's kind of limited to the potential audience that you might have of potential consumers. Same thing on the YouTube channel or Pinterest or whatever it might be. If you've developed that name and people associate it with you, you can then go in and take that name, even if it's common law. Now, the challenge here is once you're talking about some of the different social media channels, they're not as responsive sometimes to common law trademark rights. And so you have to, one of the benefits of doing a federal registration is, frankly, it gives you more leverage with a lot of the social media sites to be able to go in and say, hey, I'm not just saying this, but I've got a federal trademark registration for this as well. So, here's the number, here's the name, take these guys down, or we need to get this stopped. Right. And it gives you that protection. The other benefit of a federal registration is it gets you a little bit greater access to federal courts. You're going to have access to federal courts regardless, but it just gets you in there in the event you needed to do it. Sure. Hopefully you don't need to do it. And the reality is most people will resolve matters fairly easily. If you send them the right letter.
Right.
So,
Yeah, there was one time I was working with a client who someone else had the YouTube URL of their brand,
yeah.
and so because they had their name trademarked, and the other channels also inactive and things like that. Usually YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, they don't just hand over URLs
Right.
just because you want someone else's URL. But because it was trademarked and the other channel is inactive and things, it was a pretty easy case to make.
Right.
Like, here's the official trademark documents, and we sent it to YouTube, and then within like a week they had reassigned the URL.
It's the same for just domain name URLs as well. It also gives you a little bit of additional leverage there as well.
Yeah. So the benefits would be, one, protecting your own work and your own brand and the equity that you're building around that brand, the name that people grow to recognize and love and appreciate. And then two, it would allow you to, maybe you don't want to get into licensing necessarily, but then you could expand on that if you wanted to, and let people pay you to use your name in certain situations as well.
Yeah, and again, you don't have to have a federal registration to move into the licensing or merchandise or whatever it might be. However, it does help to have that in your back pocket, but it's not required. You can move forward on all those kind of things, and whether it's that's really more about picking the right name at that point too, because some things can serve as a trademark, some things can't.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because so video creators. Mm-hmm. I having worked with you on other projects like this, I'm fairly certain that video creators cannot be trademarked, right?
Well, here's the thing about that. I mean, when we look at...
Yeah, you can do your legal disclaimers and all that stuff.
Here's my legal disclaimers, by the way, and I'm giving you legal advice as we're in front of everybody here. But when we talk about trademarks, as I've mentioned, they have to be... the point is to make it so that consumers can know who it is, or viewers can know who it is. And as a result, they have this concept of a mark being distinctive versus, descriptive. And so there's a couple different categories of trademarks, kind of buckets people throw things into. A trademark that's not distinctive cannot serve as a trademark. So something that is generic or merely, the term of the trademark office, merely descriptive, cannot be a trademark. It has to be suggestive or fanciful or arbitrary in order to be a trademark. Now, videocreators.tv, let's use the full title here. Looking at it here, you've got a challenge, a little bit of a challenge there, because it's pretty suggestive of what, or descriptive of what you're trying to, the audience that you're trying to serve, video creators. So as a result, if you came and initially tried to register just video creators, they'd say, well, you're just helping out video creators. That's descriptive, rejected.
Right.
However, there's a couple of other factors to look at. First of all, if you're putting it into a logo, you've got your logo there. Well, that makes it a little bit, at least the logo is more protectable at that point. If you're throwing it in there as a total of videocreators.tv, again, there's an argument that it's becoming more suggestive than just descriptive. There's a little bit of an additional element of imagination that's required. Right. Now, here's one of the nice things. With the Trademark Office, when we're talking about federal registrations, they actually have two trademark registers. One's called the Principal Register, and one's called the Supplemental Register. And the idea behind the Supplemental Register is, hey, we know there's a lot of people out there that have suggestive trademarks, but they're not, maybe they could become a descriptor. They could become a source identifier in the language of the Trademark Office. Mm-hmm. So we're going to let people put their trademarks on the Supplemental Register, where they get all kinds of rights, like putting that little circle R on there. They get to have a registration number, so they get some additional protections at that point. If they need to, they can go to the customs office. There's a variety of different things. So they can do that, and after usually about 4 to 5 years, if you can prove that people are now associating that name with you, even though it's just on the suggestive side, you can actually acquire traditional trademark rights. Now, how long have you been using video creators?
Almost 5 years.
The magic number, 5 years.
Oh,
With the trademark office, you can actually skip that supplemental register and move it over and have it on the principal register. Because it's assumed that if you're using it for over 5 years with nobody else out there using it in a similar way, that you've acquired distinctiveness in that market. And so that has that.
So one piece of confusion that I think some creators have is like, what's the difference then between a trademark and a word mark? And then I know they also like get into copyright because they think, how do I copyright my logo? Well, I think, you're actually trying to do word mark or trademark. Is there a big difference between those two, or is it just semantics at this point for us?
Semantics only. There's absolutely nothing there. You will see some discussions about differences between a word mark and a design mark.
Okay.
A word mark would be, and when I look at trademarks, and when most trademark attorneys look at trademarks, they say, well, are we going to register just the words, or are we going to register the logo or the design? And typically, I prefer, if I'm choosing, if I have to pick between the two, I'm going to tell most people, let's pick the word mark to register it, because then you're basically getting protection of it in all the different variations and permutations you might have it. So your videocreators.tv logo there, if you're using that and you decide tomorrow you want to put it into a different logo or a different format where the TV is above it, or it's superimposed in a different way, well, you can do that if you registered the word mark. If it's the design mark, it's really exactly as it is on that design, and so you have some limitations at that point. So, but there's two different ones. Think of it this way: sometimes there's a Nike swoosh, sometimes the word Nike is underneath it.
Right.
So.
Okay. Yeah, or like video creators, sometimes it's the camera and the TV or next to it. Sometimes it's below the video creators, and it kind of moves around depending if I need it horizontal or vertical image. Yeah. So when should a YouTube creator consider, hey, it's probably a good idea for you to maybe think about trademarking your brand name or your channel name or something like that?
Sure. I'm always hesitant to tell people always to rush out and register your trademarks right away, because quite frankly, not everybody needs their trademarks registered. So I think, first evaluate, what are you trying to do with the channel? So if you've got a really rapid growth that you want to do with the channel, and, maybe you're looking at other things like merchandising or other, programming or subscriptions or whatever it might be, those are situations where you probably want to start looking at it, but you also want to consider how strong is your mark. I mean, is if the mark is just your name, well, then you're probably not as concerned about it at that point.
No one else wants to be Tim Schmoyer anyway. So.
Exactly. And so, there's a little bit of an evaluation there. You don't want to necessarily rush out there, because quite frankly, there's a lot of YouTube folks on YouTube and other channels out there. So,
so is there a point where you feel like after you start earning like a certain amount of revenue, or you get like a certain size audience, or you're starting to get certain types of deals? Is there just like anything that you would say like, maybe around this point, but maybe not?
I'm not sure there is a magic number, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I hate to keep harping back on the merchandising and the subscription models and things like that, but once I think you're really looking at taking it beyond the YouTube, definitely that's a place to look at it.
Okay.
I think if your growth is extremely high, where maybe you're starting to see some copycats out there, maybe again a time to think about it.
Yeah, that's good.
But normally, and with most businesses, you'll want to look at it from a growth perspective of, where do I want to be in 5 years? But, in a YouTube environment, obviously you've got the risk of it blowing up very fast, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, it might not go anywhere, unfortunately. And so you don't want to necessarily spend your money on me or trademark office, until you really need it at that point. So I think you can be cautious in this environment, and I'm sorry, less cautious in this environment, and put it off a little bit.
Okay. So I want to ask you about when it's okay for us to use other people's trademarks in our videos. But first of all, what does that trademarking process look like if we were gonna, like I feel
Sure.
like I'm at a point where I should trademark this, or maybe just like peace of mind. I just want it to be done, so I don't have to worry about it. What does the process look like?
Well, and I guess that's one of the other caveats. If you're looking at the process, the way I do it now, every attorney does it a little bit differently and with registration. But the way I typically do it, you can think of it as being broken up into at least two stages. One is an evaluation stage where we take a look at what you're looking to do, and either just see if there's any exact matches out there, or we see if there's anything that's kind of close. And do we need to, is it going to work? Or is this something we can register at all? So once we do that evaluation, if we get a thumbs up, then we proceed to the registration, where an application is prepared based upon what types of things you're going to do with the mark and what the mark is. And then we prepare that application, submit it to the trademark office, and it rapidly takes 8 months for them to take care of it. And
Good
look
old
at
government,
it.
always doing everything efficiently.
It takes about 3 months from the application filing date until it's assigned to an examining attorney, and then months in between to do some other things. And so there's that process, and then an registration comes in. Yeah. What that reminded me, though, about that is even if you're not looking to register and you haven't reached that stage where it's time to register, sometimes some folks may want to step back and say, let me do an evaluation and just get let's make sure there's nobody else out there already that's using this mark. Or maybe I think I know of somebody out there, I'm not sure about it. Sometimes that's a valuable thing to talk to somebody about is to get that evaluation done at that point.
Right, which is what you did for me. Before I was going to, I was thinking about trademarking my former business. You did a lot of research and came back and you're like, hey, before we spend all this money on the application and all that whole process, and then you gave me recommendations based on how we could strengthen it and make it a little bit more likely. And we determined in that case that it's probably not worth moving forward in trademarking in that particular case, which I really appreciated because you saved me a lot of time and a lot of money by giving me that advice and working through that with me in that evaluation process up front. So trademarking when we want to use other people's, and this is a big thing for creators, especially creators who are making content based on like Disney, things, or they, want to talk about certain movies in their videos, and they show like the movie titles and artwork and stuff. Can we get away with that, or are we getting into like more of a different conversation with fair use and things? But
a little bit of a fair use thing, but from just talking about the trademarks thing for the moment, as long as you're using it in a way where you're just in a descriptive way. So you're saying, earlier today I drank my Pepsi. Well, that's fine as long as it's clear that I'm not in. You do have to use some caution there that it doesn't appear that you're endorsing the product, or even more importantly, if you are being paid to endorse the product, that is disclosed that you have been paid to endorse that product. Because there are some FTC or Federal Trade Commission rules with regard to that. So that's something to be cautious about. But if it's an offhand saying, hey, I just had my Diet Pepsi today, and it was great, it's refreshing, whatever it might be. By the way, Pepsi Company, you can send the case of Pepsi. Anyway,
you're a big Pepsi fan. Huh?
Exactly. There's no problem with that. Or hey, I went to see the new Disney movie today. It was great. That's fine. You're using it in a descriptive way, as long as you're not, again, confusing consumers. With almost all trademark matters, it's always about stepping back, putting yourself in the perspective of the consumer or the viewer, and say, will they be confused? And so you're typically okay with using it that way. Now, once you start adding the video and all that kind of stuff, we got to talk about fair use and copyright, which is a whole nother discussion.
We've talked about that before, either here in the channel or elsewhere. I'll put a link to that conversation I had with Kenneth about fair use down below. You guys can check that out. So if I had a big logo on my hat, would I be okay?
Oh, tough question. Your logo or somebody else's?
Because so many creators will like blur out like logos on T-shirts and or even things in the background and things like that.
It gets back to that whole idea of whether it looks like you're endorsing or not.
Okay.
from a purely technical standpoint, it's not a problem. But nowadays, quite frankly, it's such an expected thing that people are endorsing something by having a hat on, that it's become an issue where people who the companies sometimes will get concerned about that, and they'll say, "Listen, we don't want you prominently displaying because we don't want people to think that we're endorsing you by having you endorse us with a hat or whatever it might be." And so that sometimes comes up. I think the general rule is, just from any media output, you want to kind of try to minimize those things in the background and minimize it to the extent necessary, unless you're talking about it. If there's a reason you have that hat on, it's because you love that hat. Great. If it's just there, well, maybe minimize that to a certain extent.
Okay. So if you can avoid it, avoid it.
There's no hard and fast rule about it. It's really more about the comfort levels of certain companies. So.
Okay. So if you have kind of like a more of a racy channel, for example, in content, and you're always wearing Nike shirts,
right.
Nike might, and it was prominently displayed, and there was no like disclosure given either way. Nike might just want to say, "Hey, make sure you're clear that we're not endorsing this because we don't want people to think that Nike supports racy content," for example.
It's something along those lines. Yes, but you basically trying to minimize. Now, if it's occasional thing, that's a different story. And they wouldn't really have a case or an argument at that point. But
okay.
I
think there's just so many.
It's a safety kind of thing. Steer clear if you can.
Yeah, there's just so many horror stories. One bad story gets circulated among all the YouTube creators, and all of a sudden everyone's like, really cautious and really scared or nervous about like, "Hey, did you hear if you do this, this could happen to you?" And like, yeah, it happened in that one case, but for most cases, you're probably fine. Like that type of voice of reason doesn't usually come into play as much when emotions are high.
And keep in mind there is a distinction, and I wish I could speak to it more clearly, but that. There is a distinction as to what YouTube permits versus what the law permits.
Okay.
And YouTube is obviously it's its own channel. It's permissible that they can set up their own rules with regard to some of these things as well. And if there's a complaint made, sometimes they'll just side with the complaint until a later point. In the trademark context, copyright is much more regulated under the DMCA, but with the trademark side, same thing. They've got their own leeway as to how much enforcement they want to do at that point.
Okay, great. So if people wanted to learn more about you and contact you, what should they do if they want to work with you on their trademark stuff?
They can go to my website, www.kunkellaw.com, and that's a good starting point. I've got a lot of information on there, links to how to set up a call with me and all that kind of fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, you guys, this is Kenneth, this guy I use. I'm using him for years, and I highly recommend him. And it's been a joy to work with him on legal stuff, which is like kind of oxymoron. A joy and legal going into the same sentence. So, yeah, you guys check him out if you'd like. Yeah. And
drink Pepsi.
And if this is your first time here on the Video Creators channel or on the iTunes podcast or wherever you're listening or watching this, love to have you subscribe. We're all about here at Video Creators is helping you guys just grow your YouTube audience, not just for the sake of money, not just for the sake of views, not just for the sake of popularity. All those things are amazing tools to accomplish what I think is most important, and that is reaching people and changing their lives. So if you're wherever you're at, subscribe. We got new content coming out for you guys every week, and I'll see you guys again soon for another Video Creators podcast episode. See you then. Bye.